Finally, after quite a delay, the Pacers signed Kendall Brown and a bunch of other players to tidy up the roster count, get it to 20 as they prep up for training camp in just over a week. We'll talk about all the signings, what it means, where the Pacers roster stands, and what could be coming next, all on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today, we're diving into some topics about a team that has never lost in Jacksonville and has never tied in Houston. The Indiana Pacers, who on Friday made a huge slurry of roster moves, signing 5 players in one day. Wow, what a day. What a news day. Finally getting that done after prioritizing flexibility, optionality, whatever word you want to use throughout the offseason. On Friday, the Pacers signed their 48th overall pick, Kendall Brown, also signed a veteran, James Johnson, out of nowhere, brought in some other guys with ties to the Mad Ants to compete in training camp. Huge day, tweaking the roster, prepping us up for camp, and really a lot to talk about as the Pacers signed some players that hadn't even really been in the Pacers orbit until late last week, at least on the reporting side. We'll start by talking about Kendall Brown, what that means, what it could mean as the season progresses, talk about the rest of the signings and the upcoming camp battle, something we haven't really seen from a Pacers perspective in past seasons, although not to this scale, at least, I should say, that I'm really looking forward to seeing. We'll just dive right into Kendall Brown. To me, the biggest news of this slurry of signings, Pacers traded up to get Kendall Brown in the draft, I think, as Kevin Pritchard described it on the Sideline Guys podcast with Pat Boyle and Jeremiah Johnson, basically from pick 32 to 48 that they ultimately got. They were trying to trade up to get, or trade into the draft to get Kendall Brown. They wanted this guy, they wanted this wing, and they signed him. But as the offseason progressed, they wanted flexibility, options, things like that, with what deal to sign him to, with roster spaces, things like that. So they just waited. No point in rushing it as long as Brown and his camp are amenable to waiting as well, which it seems like they were because it got to this point. But finally, after the draft being now almost 3 months ago, Kendall Brown signs a 2-way contract. To me, given the way the roster for the Pacers had laid out with 13 players, the fact that they were keeping the options open to me sort of meant it was going to be a 2-way because they had two 2-ways open. What's the point of giving him a roster spot that he could be cut on when he could be on a 2-way all season? You can assess his future in a year. So for all these flexibility purposes, but they still sort of tipped what was going to happen with the moves they made. They finalized the roster the same day, which sort of shows that they were all about the flexibility until they weren't, right? So makes sense. The 2-way deal, I think, is the best for a guy like Brown, who, as you can see when you watch him in summer league and practice at Baylor, whatever, super athletic. The most athletic player on the floor most of the time, unless Isaiah Jackson is also on the floor, but kind of raw in a lot of areas like shooting, ball handling, things that if he clicks with any of them, defense, shooting, ball handling, if any of those click, he becomes a valuable NBA player. It's just got to happen. And that sort of player is a development player that you need to somehow give reps, but isn't an NBA level guy yet. That's a perfect 2-way contract guy. Can play in camp with the Pacers, preseason, some early garbage time before the G League starts, then can play a ton and get reps in the G League against high-level play, against the Ignite, things like that, before eventually either being signed by the Pacers or coming back when the G League season ends. This is perfect for Kendall Brown, and sort of what was expected given the history of this 48th pick where he was selected. Last year, Sharif Cooper got picked 48th to the Atlanta Hawks. He signed a 2-way deal there, ended up signing a second 2-way deal there before getting cut. Now he's trying out for the Lakers, seeing where he can get a second contract. Nico Mannion, the year before that with Golden State, signed a 2-way deal with them. I think the same sort of thing happened, trying out for some other teams. Did not end up landing a second-year deal with any team, but that's just how the 40th pick has been in recent seasons. It's become, 45 to 50 is about the range where it becomes, NBA contract versus 2-way. It's right where the split is, and a 2-way makes sense, I think, given the Pacers roster construction and the type of player Kendall Brown is. I think that splitting time between the Mad Ants and Pacers, for those of you unfamiliar with the 2-way at this stage of the NBA, what it is it allows the player, I think now the rule is 50 days Kendall Brown can spend on the active Pacers roster throughout the NBA season, or 50 game days, I should say. So he can practice with the team. But if he plays in more than 50 games, he can no longer play with the Pacers on the 2-way. They have to sign him to a different contract. But it allows him to seamlessly split time between the Mad Ants and the Pacers with no restrictions on being sent up, sent down, announcements, things like that. He's just on a two-way deal that splits times with both teams. Terry Taylor, Dwayne Washington benefited from such a thing last year. And I think it is, again, good for a guy like Kendall Brown, right? Terry Taylor was sort of similar, where it's like, hey, this dude's second jump is unbelievable, but he's got to work on some other skills before we get him at the NBA level. He got better with Fort Wayne. He got better in Pacers camp, so like almost identical, although he didn't start the year on a two-way. And boom, he explodes, and now he's a Pacers player, right? Dwayne Washington went the two-way route, good camp, good start to the season. Rick Carlisle's using him in spot minutes, develops with the Mad Ants as a ball handler. Bam, he's on the NBA team all the time, right? This is a good way to split time and allow these dudes to develop. And the Pacers do have a history of having this work out. Poitras, Sumner, Ben Moore, Dwayne, like we've talked about, and Terry Taylor. I think I'm missing one two-way conversion that they might have had. Devon Reed played a lot on a two-way, but I don't think his deal ended up getting converted. Either way, good contract for the athletic Kendall Brown. And for a Pacers team light on the wing, this feels like the perfect way to do this, because even though they're light on the wing, they don't have playing time for him, right? Aaron Nesmith's going to play backup wing minutes. Chris Duarte or Buddy Hield's going to play backup wing minutes. At the four spots, if they want to have Kendall Brown play there, Brissett's there. Terry Taylor's there. Now James Johnson is there, who I haven't even said yet today. We'll talk about him in the next segment. So even if he was with the Pacers all season, there wouldn't be a lot of playing time for him. So with the two-way, you get him that playing time with the G League team. He can still practice with the Pacers. He can play with the Mad Ants. The garbage time will be out there. Spot minutes will be there if there's injuries, because they don't have a lot of natural guys at the position. I think this is the perfect happy medium for these two parties, and sort of part of why, again, I've been predicting this all along. Perfect fit on an athletic Pacers team, too. Rick Carlisle talking about, I can't remember if it was either the Jalen Smith press conference or the post-draft press conference, where he was talking about the Pacers no longer being last in the league in dunks. He wants the team to be more athletic. Hey, Kendall Brown is a perfect fit for something like that. Ronald Norred, their assistant coach, who is their summer league head coach, I think I've told this story on the show a bunch, but there was one summer league practice where they were running sprints, and he turned away for a second and turned back, and Kendall Brown was way ahead of everybody, right? Like just stunningly ahead of everybody. So a perfect fit for Brown too, and he could get a promotion. I think that is a key thing to remember with these two ways, as well as if you think this guy is better than this contract, and the Pacers seem to indicate that they valued him with a first round grade and gave him a two-way. I kind of hate when that progression of words and actions happen, but if they do really view him that highly, we will see with their actions more so than their words. But he could get a promotion midseason, which, like I talked about, just happened last year with Terry Taylor and Dwayne Washington, who played well with Fort Wayne. The Pacers had some open roster spots after the trade deadline and after Justin Anderson's 10-day contracts expired, and they said, let's promote these guys. Let's get them on the team because we want them this year and next year, right? If Brown has a similar successful season, such as those guys I mentioned earlier, Poitras, Sumner, those guys last year, he could still get promoted, be on an NBA contract, be a future with the team. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he goes. I was pretty high on Kendall Brown pre-draft. For those who were listening to Locked On Pacers frequently before the draft, know I had him in the first round myself with his athleticism and speed. And I still think that the Pacers are pretty high on him as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how he can go. And there is flexibility with the Pacers, with their 15th spot, not even really technically filled. It's probably going to be a non-guaranteed contract. Brissett is technically non-guaranteed. Veterans who could be moved at random moments throughout the season, right? They have flexibility to open roster spots midseason if they need to promote him very easily. So he is better than the typical 48th pick to me, but I think a two-way is still the best option because of the way it will allow him to develop and because the Pacers' current roster situation is probably the perfect way for him to develop and then eventually join the NBA team for a long time. And hey, he's a wing. Being a wing in general on its own, basically, just that size is good right now. And if you're fast or can shoot or can defend or can dribble, you've got something to explore. And Kendall Brown has the fast part, and that's why the Pacers wanted him. He's got that athleticism. Now, if they can develop some of those other skills, whether that's with Tom Hankins and the Mad Ants, which has happened in the past, with Carlisle and the Pacers, whatever it is, that development will go a long way into springboarding his career. So two-way contract for Kendall Brown, I think that's the right decision by the Pacers and why I've been predicting it for most of the offseason, even though there was some merit to other types of deals. But it's locked up. It's done. Kendall Brown, two-way this year, will split time with the Pacers and Mad Ants, and we will get our first glimpses of him most likely in preseason action. And great news that he didn't get hurt in that interim between the flexibility part of the offseason and actually signing. EJ Liddell with the Pelicans tore his ACL before signing. That stuff always sucks, and I'm glad it did not happen to Kendall Brown, and I'm sure everybody involved is as well. Hey, Kendall Brown was the headliner because the Pacers just drafted him, but the Pacers signed 4 other players, 3 of whom have NBA experience, 1 of whom has played in the NBA for 13 years and reached the conference finals with the Toronto Raptors in 2016. We'll break down all of those signings and what it means going forward in the next segment. Before we do that, though, guys, I got to talk to you about Rocket Money. Do you know how much your subscriptions really cost? Most Americans think they spend around $80 a month on subscriptions when the actual total cost is closer to $200 or more. That's right. You could be wasting hundreds of dollars each month on subscriptions you don't even know about. Rocket Money is the answer for that. It's the perfect app to save that money. Formerly known as Truebill, the app shows you all your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want for you. Rocket Money can even find subscriptions you didn't even know you were paying for. You may even find out you've been paying double charge for a subscription to cancel subscription. All you do in the app, press cancel. Rocket Money takes care of the rest. Cancel unnecessary subscriptions with Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Try it yourself. Seriously, it could save you hundreds of dollars per year. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day as you dive into podcasts. For your second listen, easy peasy. Locked On Women's Basketball WNBA Finals finished last night. Aces get it done. The All Vibes team, one of the most fun basketball teams I've watched this year. Aces get it done. Howard Bankdahl, Jackie Powell. We'll break it all down from Mohegan Sun Arena, where the Aces took down the Connecticut Sun. Hey, back to the Pacers talk, though. Let's talk about what they did over the weekend that wasn't in the signing Kendall Brown division. 4 other signees. Pacers had 5 roster spots, and bam, they filled them. They filled them up. Evan Sidery over at Basketball News reported last week that James Johnson, veteran, was a name in the mix for the Pacers, and he was one of the guys signed. I think the headliner of the other 4 non-Kendall Brown players. James Johnson's been around the league for a long time. Tough dude, veteran. We'll talk about him in a second. The other 3 guys besides James Johnson that were signed to deals: David Stockton, that's right, the son of John Stockton, 2 years of NBA experience with the Kings and the Jazz. Bennie Boatwright, some of you who really keep up with the Pacers know him from 2 summer league experiences and a season with the Mad Ants. And Gabe York, who, again, if you keep up with the Pacers, was on the Pacers for the final 2 games of last season on a 2-way deal. Played well for Fort Wayne last year. Was about to sign a hardship 10-day with the Magic, but it fell through. Fringe NBA level talent. So clearly the most noteworthy, interesting, whatever you want to call it, guy in this group, James Johnson, for a million reasons. First of all, he's kind of good. Not really good anymore. I won't want to say he's super talented. Like he didn't play every game for the Nets last year, but most of them. He was a rotation level player for a playoff team in the East last year. Played 62 games for Brooklyn, 20 minutes a game last year. Only 5.5 points and 3.5 rebounds. More of a bit player at this stage, but like he's been around. 2009 first round pick, 13 seasons in the NBA. 9 different franchises. He's played that dirty man utility role, whatever you want to call it at this stage. He's been around. And I think he's the perfect kind of natural fit for what the Pacers need if they were going to go the veteran route with one of their last roster spots. Let's talk about James Johnson's resume. Conference finalist with Toronto, right? In 2016, was on a good Raptors team, has also made the playoffs with Memphis, Chicago, and Miami. So really been around in several teams of the postseason, 2 of those teams making it beyond the first round. So 1, veteran experience. Of the vets on the Pacers, he is now, I think, the only one who's made it into the second round of the postseason. Jalen Smith obviously did with the Suns, but he wasn't a veteran on that team, right? That acumen doesn't mean as much when you're not as good at being a leader. TJ McConnell hasn't made the conference finals, although he had some good seasons. Oh, Daniel Tice obviously made the finals last year. But they added more veteran experience. How about that? I just talked out my butt for a couple seconds. Either way, good vet and has been for a long time. 2, he's a forward. Holy cow. Those actually exist. The Pacers have some natural forwards in O'Shea Brissett, and that's pretty much it, right? Kendall Brown, who we just talked about, sort of a natural forward, but a lot of the guys that'll be playing at the 3 this year, Duarte, Hield, Neesmith, are kind of 2-3 hybrids, and O'Shea Brissett's definitely a 4, but their other 4s are Jalen Smith, who's a 5, Terry Taylor, who I view as a 5, right? They got a forward. That's a big deal to me. James Johnson even played the 3 at sometimes early in his career with Chicago, with Toronto. So in the modern NBA, he's 6'7", 240. That's more of a 4-5 type, but he's definitely a natural 4. And holy cow, the Pacers need that. So to me, this guy who brings toughness, he's very well known for that. A veteran and a forward, that's like kind of exactly what the Pacers needed. He is the eldest Pacer by 5 years. 5 years. He's 5 years older than TJ McConnell. I don't even know if he's going to make the final roster. There's a chance that all of these signings, in fact, I would wager I won't say I wager anything. I would say with 95% certainty, all four of the guys I'm talking about in this segment, York, Boatwright, um, James Johnson, and David Stockton, are all on non-guaranteed contracts. And I bet there's some Exhibit 10 clauses for three of these guys. I don't know that, so I won't pretend to confirm it. But either way, there's still some flexibility. Maybe they aren't on the team. But for what the Pacers in theory needed, another vet, an actual forward, and some toughness. Carlisle's been talking about they need toughness for a while. James Johnson checks all those. And speaking of that, he played for Rick Carlisle with the Mavs in 2020, 21 with Dallas for 30-ish games. Not a long time, but enough that matters to the point that Carlisle can say, hey, I know something about this guy. He's a good fit in our culture. I think that is a very noteworthy signing for a million reasons, but he kind of checks like every box you theoretically want for a vet joining your basketball team, and that's what the Pacers wanted. Who knows if he actually makes the final roster, but of the guys competing for it, which we'll talk about in the final segment today, I mean, he's got to have the advantage over everybody else. I think, again, likely he's on a non-guaranteed deal, still competing for a spot in general, and will be mostly throughout the season into January when contracts become guaranteed, assuming that's the case, but we will see when that time actually comes. Now, the other guys, let me get something out of the way that's important here. Stockton, Boatwright, York, even Davidas Servidas, who they signed last month, the Pacers have the rights with the Mad Ants as well. I think that's very important to note with all these guys. The Mad Ants traded for David Stockton's rights from the Memphis Hustle earlier this month, maybe late August, I can't remember. Bennie Boatwright, they had his rights last year. He played with the Mad Ants all year. Same with Gabe York, who then had the two at the end of the year. They traded with the Detroit Crews for Servidas' rights. That is noteworthy because then if the Pacers waive them and they get on an Exhibit 10 and they get a bonus and they report to Fort Wayne, or they report to the G League, they'll go to Fort Wayne. The Pacers keep them in the organization. They get a bonus. That doesn't mean, I said that really fast, that doesn't mean they don't have a chance to make the Pacers roster or they're not competing for it, but I do think it's noteworthy that a lot of these guys who signed the Mad Ants have their rights, which generally means it's an Exhibit 10 guy who is, in theory, competing for a spot, but is more likely going to end up in the G League. Either way, they all have kind of good reason to maybe say they have a shot at the Pacers open two-way slot that still exists, and they're all good, right? David Stockton, 2 years in the pros, like I said, some with the Kings, some with the Jazz, even playing in the playoffs for 2 games for Utah in 2017-18. Obviously, he's going to be well known for being John Stockton's son, the assist king. But even in the G League, Stockton is the assist king. He's 6th in the G League all-time assists. Had a 22 assist game with the Reno Bighorns. That is the second most in a single game in G League history. Obviously, only 6 NBA games, not quite an NBA talent, but hey, for a team with only 3 point guards, and the Pacers played like 100 point guards last year, having depth at that position is valuable. Perhaps he could sneak onto the team on a two-way deal, for example. He is 31, he's older, but has that experience, has been around, and perhaps could be competing for a spot, but is more likely going to be a Mad Ant. Bennie Boatwright was with the Mad Ants last year. He was really good for the Pacers in Summer League 2 years ago and then got hurt. Was decent for the Pacers in the Summer League this year. And then, 14.5 points, 7.5 rebounds in the G League Showcase last year. Double-double averages during the regular season, but only played in a few games. He's a big man who's mobile and can shoot. Really interesting kind of player who's raw in some areas, but in theory looks like a key guy who can play the 4 and the 5. Valuable for a Pacers team looking for depth at the 4, but we'll see where he fits in. And again, the Mad Ants do hold his rights. Gabe York, many of you who kept up with the Pacers at the end of last season know who he is. Ended up playing in the Pacers' final 2 games. Was in the rotation. Like they needed him to play for injury reasons. Ended up scoring 8 points, dishing out 4 assists in those 2 games. Played 21 minutes, right? He has that NBA experience. He has played for Carlisle with this team before. Good rim attacker. But here's the thing about both York and Stockton that's noteworthy to me. York's 29 and Stockton's 31. They're both on the older side. So I guess that has value that they're veterans, you could say. They've been around and done it. But for a younger Pacers team, that did stand out to me that they were both a little on the old side. Either way, Pacers fill out with those guys. I don't know who is and isn't on Exhibit 10s yet. I'll try to get that confirmed Monday or Tuesday when I have a little more time to make some calls. Either way, those are the guys brought in by the Pacers. Again, I would wager, I guess I'll say wager this time. If I were going to put money on it, I would wager that Stockton, Boatwright, and York are all Exhibit 10 deals, and James Johnson is just a non-guaranteed standard NBA deal. We'll see when those details actually come out. Now, hey, a lot of people said something to me on Twitter to the effect of, hey, what's going on? I heard back around Summer League or after the draft that the Pacers signed other guys to Exhibit 10s. Remember, Tevin Brown, Jermaine Samuels, Fanbo Zhang, Eli Brooks were all reported to sign Exhibit 10s with the Pacers. They all played on the Pacers Summer League team even. So what happened? What is the change here? Maybe nothing. I would advise everyone to pump the brakes for a second, right? what can happen with these Exhibit 10 guys? These guys that I just talked about, Stockton, Boatwright, and York, they could not even make it to training camp, right? Other teams have already been making waivers and cutting guys who are on Exhibit 10 deals, right? Kiefer Sykes, Pacer last year, played in a bunch of games. The Pistons signed him and waived him already this offseason, right? He could still get a bonus for reporting to the G League, but that's already been happening. Detroit's done it to Micah Potter as well. Sacramento has done it, to one player. The Hawks, I think, did it as well, right? Exhibit 10s, you cycle through a bunch of them. If you go back to last summer for the Pacers, their first round of cuts were Terry Taylor, Kiefer Sykes, and I cannot remember the third one for the life of me. And then they signed Justin Anderson to an Exhibit 10 deal, Derek Culver, and Bennie Boatwright, who they all cut the next day, right? You go through several Exhibit 10s every offseason. The Pacers went through 6 last year. So all that to say, it's still possible that, Stockton, Boatwright, York, whoever, Servetus gets waived, and then the guys that you've already heard and been rumored do get signed to an Exhibit 10 deal ultimately. So could be a lot of competition with those 4 guys, with these guys, with, Evan Sidery, who reported the James Johnson and Kendall Brown signings. Also said Langston Galloway apparently in the mix of the Pacers. Like, there could be a lot to come still, and I wouldn't say just because their roster is now up to 20 and full that it means they're done. That stuff could still be coming, even maybe before training camp, maybe right at the beginning of training camp. Who knows? I don't know the Pacers thinking or what the timing element means to them, but I would still say just be cautious on saying, oh, why didn't they sign those guys? They still could. I think that more will be coming for the Pacers in this offseason. Hey, speaking of stuff coming for the Pacers, a training camp battle is certainly coming in a way that the Pacers haven't really had in a couple years. Let's talk about what's coming up with this camp battle in camp next month. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, how about Locked On Lakers? They got a lot to talk about, but Dennis Schroeder, they just signed him. Killed it for Germany in Eurobasket. Apparently, they think Patrick Beverley's a wing. Russell Westbrook's the point guard. The Lakers are crazy. The Locked On Lakers guys will have it for you. Hey, back to the Pacers, though. They have 20 guys now. That's the max. They were at 15 after signing Servetus, James Johnson, Stockton, Boatwright, York, and Brown. That's 5. 15 plus 5 is 20. That's a full roster. The Pacers have a full team. If they want to sign someone else, if Langston Galloway is truly in the mix, if some of these Exhibit 10 guys want to be added, if Lance Stephenson's still in the mix, who knows? They have to cut someone or trade someone to make that happen. That is just a point I would like to make because a camp battle is coming. There are going to be effectively tryouts for the Pacers happening early in camp, starting about a little over a week from now, and through the preseason. Because let's just break down the 20 contracts the Pacers have currently signed. 13 of them are guaranteed deals. Those guys are going to be on the team. 2 of them are non-guaranteed deals, assuming I'm right about James Johnson, which I assume I am. James Johnson and O'Shea Brissett. And O'Shea Brissett is effectively a lock, effectively a guaranteed contract. 1 two-way, Kendall Brown, and then the 4 Exhibit 10 guys, Stockton, Boatwright, York, and Servetus. So effectively, if you count Brissett as a lock, plus the 13 guaranteed NBA contracts, they have 14 NBA spots filled. And your maximum for the season is 15. So they have an open roster spot, technically. James Johnson, you could say, is filling it right now. But again, if it's non-guaranteed, perhaps there's competition there. Plus, only one of their 2 two-way slots is filled. Kendall Brown has one. The other one is vacant. Exhibit 10 contracts can be converted, upgrade two-way, upgraded to 2 ways at any time if a guy impresses. So the Pacers have set up camp competition. It looked like this was going to be the case last year. Remember, Kiefer Sykes coming in to compete for potentially a 2-way contract for them or a roster spot before they traded away Edmund Sumner and then signed Brad Wanamaker. So they haven't really had a competition, especially to this degree, with potentially 2 spots on the line. This is a big deal. This is pretty interesting to me that the Pacers have set it up in this way where there could truly be a battle and a competition for a contract to be on an NBA team this season. So like David Servetus, Stockton, Boatwright, York, like they could be battling for 2 ways if they can make it into camp, if they can keep going. Like the Pacers social media accounts have shared photos from some of the team workouts. Servetus has been in the building. He was at Tyrese Halliburton's camp this weekend. Like he's been around, right? What if that means he's got an upper hand? He was signed a lot earlier than a lot of these guys. In theory, he could have been here sooner. Maybe they do like him and would like to see if he can earn a 2-way. Same kind of deal with any of the guys, though. Boatwright's been good for them in the G League before. Gabe York was literally on a 2-way for them to end last season. Point guard depth is very important, right? Same with argument can be made for David Stockton outside of playing for the team last year. Perhaps those guys are competing for a two-way slot. Perhaps they're competing for the final roster spot. What if they're awesome in the preseason or camp, and they say, we'd rather have this guy than James Johnson? You just don't know. It's very fluid for the Pacers at this time. And maybe it's not even James Johnson they're competing with. I don't know. This all seems like it's set up for a very interesting competition. And if none of them impress, bam, you can move on from them and bring in the other guys that reportedly were going to be signed to Exhibit 10 deals. So I'll be very curious how that shakes out. From my seat now, zooming out, looking at the Pacers, and I haven't talked to anyone about this. I haven't seen at the end of any practices. We haven't had any media availability yet this season. I think that'll get going next week. James Johnson seems like he would have the leg up for the reasons I shared earlier, right? A vet, played with Carlisle, has a ton of experience, and he's naturally at a position that they need guys at, right? That seems like a pretty good fit for your 15th and final roster spot, especially if his deal is non-guaranteed. But that doesn't mean he's a lock. What if someone looks good in camp? What if Servidis, who's had some success as a shooter with Detroit and in Summer League for the Pelicans, looks great? What if, Bennie Boatwright takes a step forward? What if Gabe York looks like a little bit better after getting some maybe experience? These are just things to think about. Now, noteworthy as well, Boatwright, York, Stockton, they're all eligible for two-way deals, as is Servidis. James Johnson is not. He has too much NBA experience to get a two-way, which also means he might have a leg up for the roster spot because it's the only one he can actually have. So that's also noteworthy in this. But camp is going to matter. Preseason games might matter, right? I'm sure they have an idea of who they want. It's not like a secret who's better and not better from this group. But when you're a young developing team, sometimes your interests or what you're considering isn't always just who's the best or who has the most on-court value right this second. So I think this is going to be absolutely fascinating. Any of the rumored guys who aren't even on the team yet, maybe Langston Galloway, maybe Lance sneaks in and gets involved, and that might require waivers, but just keep your eyes peeled. Like, there's going to be a lot of moves. Keep an eye on guys you think are good or guys that are getting gassed up by coaches or players, because that matters in this sort of thing where there is competition for contracts and money and a spot on an NBA roster. It's going to matter quite a bit, and I think it's going to be fascinating. We haven't really seen this from the Pacers before, where it's not obvious who their roster is going to be, right? Once Brad Wanamaker was signed last year, even before all the tweaks with the Exhibit 10 guys, it's pretty obvious who the Pacers roster is going to be in camp. That's pretty much been the case every year. I'm trying to think if there's any examples of something different than that, but I can't think of any. To me, Keelan Martin last year had this guaranteed date thing that was a little complicated, but in general, it's been pretty obvious what the deal is going to be. This year, it's not, right? It's less obvious who's going to get the last two-way slot or even the last roster spot. Fascinating setup. And camp, impressions, preseason going to matter in a way that they didn't necessarily as much for these back end of the roster guys. So given who's signed right now, right this second, I can't predict what the Pacers do in the future or if all the reports are going to come true or anything like that, because again, I haven't made a lot of calls. Either way, my guess is given who's signed right now would be James Johnson for roster spot 15 and Servidis for two-way spot number 2. But if any of these other Exhibit 10 guys get in there and look good, or maybe they want, to bring, again, maybe Langston Galloway sneaks in on the final roster spot. If, again, Evan Sider is reporting, turns out to be correct and he's signed, who knows? But because they have all these G League rights, it's hard to say who has a leg up and who doesn't on the two-way race. But my prediction now would be James Johnson on roster spot 15, David Servidis on two-way spot number 2. But that all obviously could change. It's very fluid, and that's sort of how the Pacers have been recently. They like flexibility. They like to have options. So look out for who's impressive here. And anyone fighting for a two-way or an end-of-roster spot will be worth watching in the preseason and camp. And we'll, of course, cover that all here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Speaking of coverage, I was writing a lot this weekend. I finally had some time in my life to sit down and do stuff. Over at Forbes Sports, you'll find details on all these signings and my full thoughts on Russell Westbrook trade negotiations and things like that. So check that out. I wrote somewhere else about Daniel Theis's squad taking third place in Eurobasket. We'll talk about Eurobasket later this week. That was exciting. Good for Theis. It was cool to see him and his family celebrate that moment. And then tomorrow on Locked On Pacers, this was supposed to be today, but obviously the signings are the big news. Miles Turner season preview. Big one. Big season for him. Big guy to cover. Looking forward to chatting about Turner and his upcoming season. We'll try to do another season preview this week, but we're at the mercy of roster moves and things like that, and a Pacers event happening later this week. Hey, thank you guys a ton for listening. Hope you had a great weekend watching sports, consuming whatever you like, and you were safe. And thanks again for listening all the way through to this episode of Locked On Pacers. Come back tomorrow. Hear me talk about Miles Turner and his pivotal age 26 season with the Pacers. Till then, have a great day.